What's up, people? Welcome to this week's episode of the Indy and Dots podcast. Bear in mind, it's just me. There's no doctor. He's not on this side. It's just me in the starting image. But fear not, I'm joined by a great guest. His name is Sheroy. He is a legal aid worker, and he's dealt with many issues with the government. He gave me a massive insight into the legal world / corporate world, how it all works, the ins and outs of it. He's also a YouTube personality as well, so he works with AFTV. We dove into many football topics, so I understand that's not for everyone, but it is worth listening to because you get to understand how that YouTube world is blowing up and how it is getting bigger and bigger, and he's on the biggest fan channel in the world. So guys, check it out. Drop me a message. Let us know your thoughts after. Peace. What's up, people? Welcome to this week's episode of the Indy and Dots podcast. It's only me. There is no doctor, but fear not. I'm joined by a real special guest. He's one of my boys from uni. I've known this guy for a very long time. You might recognize him from a few places, but let me give him the standard intro I give to everyone. So he is a legal aid human rights lawyer, specialising in immigration and asylum law. He has been a part of the movement to give a voice to the most disenfranchised members of society. We'll touch on that in a bit. He's also recently started to delve into the YouTube area of fan football channels, which I respect massively. And he works with Arsenal Fan TV, aka AFTV, which I think is the biggest fan channel in the world. His name's Sheroy. Sheroy, how you doing, bro?
Man, absolute pleasure to be on here, and that intro is way too kind, man, but I can't complain. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I got to add some sauce on top of the intro and to make it sound good. So yeah, that's what I do.
Oh, you did a good job.
Thanks, bro. Thanks, man. So let's go straight into it. Tell me about legal aid. How does it work? Because in my head, I think it's like in Suits when Mike Ross is giving help to the clinic. And I'm like, is that what legal aid is? Like, how does it actually work? How do people pay for it? Like, give me the lowdown.
It's a strange one because even when I was studying law, I didn't really know what legal aid was. Because when you go to all of the legal sort of clinics or whatever that are run at uni at the careers fairs, they're all pretty much corporate stuff.
Yeah.
And a lot of people get thrown into that corporate line of work because it's all that they are told is out there for lawyers, right?
Yeah.
But the longer I did that, and the longer that I spoke to people who were jumping onto those grad schemes, I realized that I really couldn't pretend to care about mergers and acquisitions and corporate takeovers and stuff. And I remember, well, perhaps not as good for my pocket, but yeah, I guess good for society. But I just remembered why I wanted to do law, right? And the reason I wanted to do law is because I grew up in an area where disenfranchised people couldn't necessarily afford legal representation, but needed high quality legal representation. And that's what legal aid is. So legal aid isn't necessarily pro bono, the same way that Mike was at pro bono clinics and Suits where he wasn't getting any remuneration. Legal aid is taxpayer funded, but not everything comes within the scope of legal aid. So you couldn't get legal aid for conveyancing or whatever. You can only get legal aid for immigration or asylum cases, and even then only where you're being threatened with persecution in your country of origin, for example, right? And that's all means tested, and it tends to be the most disenfranchised members of society that need legal aid, because more often than not, it's the people without a voice or the ones who have suffered real ills at the hands of the state that nobody necessarily wants to listen to and have the hardest battle to fight, right?
Damn, bro, that's a very honest assessment because most people normally just do it for the bag. So all they want is the money, and then they just dip. That's it, and they'll sell.
I get paid. Don't get me wrong.
To some millionaire.
I get paid.
Of course, but I doubt you get paid as heavily as anybody else who's like at the real top end of law.
Yeah. So on average, I'd say for someone who's got 6 years of qualification experience under their belt, working in the postcode that I work in, I reckon I'm taking home a third of what the corporate lawyer up the road is taking home, realistically. But
that's mad.
But I'm in love with my clients, and I work in a team that's not just like a family, but like an army. And I look at myself in the mirror every day, and I'm not dreading going to work, you know. And that, for me, you can't put a price on that, man.
That's a big W, man. A lot of people don't have that privilege. But hang on, you were saying that you're government funded, so does that mean you guys are going to go on strike next?
Well, no. I mean, the work is taxpayer funded, but it's a private company. So ultimately, ultimately, the way it works is if I bring a case against the Home Office, for example, and I lose, I get paid at a really, really shoddy legal aid rate, right? Where it doesn't even make sense necessarily for certain people to do that kind of work because of the overheads and so forth. But if you win, the government has to pay your costs, and they remunerate you at private rate because you shouldn't have had to have brought the litigation. So it's at that point that we take on. So in a way, you're also incentivized to win because then you do secure the bag. But as anyone knows, if you're going up against the state
of course,
in a heavily politicized legal system, it's not always easy to win those cases.
Yeah, they must put up a hell of a fight, man. You must be up against the best and best. The best of the best, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Put it this way: the last case that I was in court for, our opponent, he was a lord who had to be addressed as a lord. They wheeled out, serious heavy hitters for that case. That was the Rwanda litigation, which we'll no doubt get onto. But when the government wants to fight a case, they will fight it, tooth and nail.
Jeez, man. Imagine going up against someone and calling him a lord. You just
crazy.
feel a little bit intimidated, just a little bit, like, ooh, okay.
Yeah, that, and look, I'll be honest, I know it's tradition.
So you dipped after uni?
Sorry, yeah, carry on.
Oh, go on.
I was just saying it's tradition.
No.
It's tradition in the courtroom, to call someone a lord or whatever. It never really sits right with me because I'm a bit like, well, you're ultimately just another man in a room. I needn't call you a lord or whatever, but it's a sign of respect, it's a sign of deference, and it's a traditional thing. But you still go into court and you see people wearing their wigs and their gowns and stuff, and it's all very archaic. All of the wigs are basically blonde locks. They're not designed for ethnic minorities to even be in those rooms, right? And that still hasn't changed. And if you want to, let's say you've got a hairstyle that doesn't necessarily permit you to wear a wig. For example, there's a Court of Appeal judge, Lord Justice Rabinder Singh, very respected judge. Now he obviously wears a bug, and he was one of the first people that I could remember as a barrister who was conducting advocacy without a wig because a bug was a religious item, right? And you can't be discriminated against in the courtroom. But then I've also got a lot of black friends, and even though it may not be religious, it's an inherent part of their identity to wear their afro the way they wear their afro, and the wig simply doesn't work. The wig doesn't work with that, right? But they aren't necessarily met with the same level of flexibility by certain courtrooms that other people in other sectors are. So it's always an interesting one. It's always an interesting one.
So you do have to wear a wig. I didn't think that. I thought yours was dealt by like emails and stuff, because that's the biggest difference between being a solicitor and a lawyer, isn't it? They're two very separately involved people.
So it's the barristers that wear the wigs, right? So that lord that I was speaking about was a barrister, and Rabinder Singh that I was speaking about was a barrister, but he's now a Court of Appeal judge. I would be sat behind them in the courtroom, having signed up the client, obtained the evidence, taken the witness statements, tried to help formulate the legal argument, prepare the case as well as I could, and it goes over to the barrister to present if you're in the High Court, the Court of Appeal, or the UK Supreme Court, which is the higher courts, right? But if I'm dealing with a bail application or an appeal against a refusal of asylum, that's at what people would call the lower courts, and that's where I'll conduct my own advocacy. So I'd be doing the whole thing myself there. Got
it. But the question is, do you wear the wig? Yes or
no? No. Come on, man. I don't get paid every week to wear a wig. Come on, man. Come on. No, I wouldn't be allowed to. That is reserved. That is reserved for barristers.
Okay, good. Just checking. Because I'd ridicule you until your last days for wearing that wig, man. Honestly, I would.
Not a chance. I've never even posed with one, let alone worn one for work.
Good. Just checking. So post uni, I remember we split our separate ways because you were in third year, I was in first year, and you said you wanted to do an LPC and you dipped. I mean, I never heard from you again because you were doing the LPC, which is so intensive and so difficult to complete. So tell people about that and just give like a real insight on how difficult it actually is to go through an LPC and then make it to where you've got to now, because it's not a linear straight pathway. People drop in and out all the time and they find it really difficult. Yeah,
I mean, even before the LPC, so I studied politics as an undergrad, as you know, but I had to do the GDL, which is the graduate diploma in law. That's what people call the law conversion. If you've got another undergraduate discipline and you want to practice law, you have to do the GDL. That was the most difficult academic year of my life because they cram, I mean, not least financially. I was working at the Heathrow Airport at silly hours just to sort of get some money for it. And even then, I couldn't afford the whole course by myself. So it's super expensive, which bars access to the profession for a lot of people. It's a massive barrier because if you're not fortunate enough to be able to have part-time work and family who could help you through the course, it's just not going to happen. So I was quite fortunate in that regard.
Yeah.
But the GDL ultimately is all of the compulsory modules that people studied on the 3-year LLB within about 9 months. And they're not modules that you necessarily want to do. So I knew that I wanted to do legal aid, public law in the sphere of immigration and asylum, so challenging government policy. Although, in fact, I wasn't set on immigration and asylum at that point, but that's neither here nor there. But I had to study property law, business law, all these things. I mean, I couldn't care less. I literally could not care less. I had to learn about quorum at board meetings and sharehold transfers, and I was just thinking, okay, look, this is a means to an end. But it was one of the most anxiety-inducing courses I've ever sat through. And that's, having jumped through every academic hoop to get an undergraduate degree, and that came along. But even after that, it's not guaranteed that you're going to get a job. So I applied to a number of places to try and get my LPC, the compulsory course you have to do as a solicitor, trying to get that funded. Graduated into a recession, basically. Everyone was like, nope, sorry, not going to happen. And the caliber of firm that was paying for that course wasn't the type of firm that I wanted to work for. So again, had to bite the bullet and take another sort of financial risk and do the LPC. I'll be honest, that course isn't as difficult as the GDL. The LPC is very much sort of rope learning.
Okay.
If you're willing to sort of sit there and tab up a textbook and you've got a bit of nous about you, you can get through that. That's not too tough. But it's more the idea that you have your undergrad, you've then done the graduate diploma in law, you still have to do another course, and even then you're not guaranteed to be a solicitor, because you then have to get what's known as a training contract.
No.
And it's only after a 2-year training contract that I could become a solicitor. And to get that, I had an unpaid internship for a month, I paralegaled for a year, had to sit another set of accreditation exams, and then got my training contract. So looking at it all in, you're looking at the best part of a decade, man, just to get to entry level. Yeah.
Jeez, man. And I thought medics had it bad, but that's even worse. Like that's you've gone through a normal degree, so that's 3 years. We were in the 3 grand, so we're like, okay. But then you got bumped after that into the 9 grand bracket as well. So I'm like, geez, that's
14.
That's a big
14.
expense.
The GDL was 14.
Again to do the third thing.
GDL was 14, and then the
14
and the LPC. The LPC was around 17. I think they're more expensive now than they were then.
Why did they make the barrier to entry so high? Do you think it's simply like a monetary thing, as if like, can you back it money-wise and you'll make it? Because it doesn't seem like it's based on merit. It seems like it's being based on money now, which isn't a fair comparison to make.
Yeah, I would agree, and that's why there's loads of discourse about access to the profession, because these are compulsory courses, and of course there are bursaries, there are grants or whatever, but for that person from a single parent family in the inner city who isn't privately educated to have the stuff on paper, not necessarily up here, I'm talking just the stuff on paper, to satisfy someone that they're worthy of that bursary, what are the odds? What are the odds? And yeah, 1 or 2 will be super exceptional and do it, but there are a lot of brilliant minds out there that are precluded from accessing the profession because they don't have the funds, or they can't manage to secure the part-time job while studying for one reason or another. And access to the profession is huge, and it's not just at entry level, man. It's when you look at really well-respected legal rankings, when you look at the proportion of qualified solicitors, partners, barristers that come from a black or ethnic minority background, that's race. And then if you want to talk about class, it's probably even more divisive. Because even a lot of the people I know from Asian backgrounds anyway, who have managed to get into this profession and absolutely excel, they wouldn't necessarily have come from the lowest income families in London. They would have been what we would call middle class. But it's so difficult for working class families or kids to follow that dream, without having to be the cream of the crop.
Jeez, man. That's a shame, because people are just going to see that course and that route and say, well, forget it, I'll go into something else that's probably more attainable and will get me a quicker turnaround of money. I mean, imagine if you're being a graduate now, today, and all those Mickey Mouse courses that people used to call it, like, for example, I did geography. I'm not sure if your course would potentially come under that, because it doesn't take you to a straight job afterwards. So all those courses are just going to evaporate, and it becomes harder and harder for someone to take that leap of faith to then take that much debt on themselves and then go into that course, not even knowing you're going to be given a job at the end.
Well, this is the thing. So what a lot of people do in that situation, if they do want to become lawyers, is they go down the corporate route, because as I said, those are the people that will fund you for those courses, and those are the people that will give you the massive salary, not because they want to be corporate lawyers, but because they've now realized that that's the only feasible way of becoming a lawyer. If I sat down and had a candid conversation over a few drinks with a lot of my mates who are corporate lawyers, and I told them what I do, they would say, bro, I would switch jobs with you in a heartbeat if it wasn't for the money. You know, they all wanted to get into law for a specific purpose. None of them, you know, it doesn't really do it for them, sitting there and dotting the I's and crossing the T's in contracts for people, you know, who would speak to them like absolute shit. Now, I'm not saying that's what every corporate lawyer does. I'm not saying that's what every corporate client is like. But the vast majority of people I know in that line of work, it's not a particularly fulfilling career if you're talking about your moral compass. And I think one thing anyway that the pandemic taught a lot of people is that, you know, if your day-to-day isn't fulfilling you to that extent, what does that money really get you? You know, where does it get you in the end? And it sort of recalibrated a lot of people's priorities. And that's why I'm now having those conversations with people. And now, if you look at our team, at my firm, we have a lot of ex-Magic Circle, Silver Circle lawyers leaving their big boy firms and coming to us and saying, this is what we want to do now, because this is where our passion is. Will you help us? Will you train us? So these are qualified solicitors coming from firms where they were earning 3 times as much, coming to us, taking the pay cut and saying, look, teach me from scratch. This is what I want to do.
That's amazing, man. That's actually really good. That gives you hope, innit? That it's not just about the money. It's about like having some fulfillment and doing something that's technically the right thing to help people that are less able to represent themselves, I guess, is the clearest thing, which takes us into the next topic, obviously. So the main thing that you've been fighting on recently that's had the biggest set of public attention is the Rwanda policy. So give us a rundown on when that was announced by the Home Secretary from the third previous Home Secretary. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, or second, I guess. So when she announced it, Priti Patel, that was massive, and there was a massive set of backlash to that. Even then, prior to that, she'd already set in stone a few things like the immigration bill, making people like me and you second-class citizens because of our parents and whatnot. And now this is like the next step, which is basically stopping people coming over at all. If you do come over illegally, we're going to send you back to Rwanda. I'm assuming this affected you directly. So give me a rundown of how that all happened for you in a bit of a timeline, if you can.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I would say is her use of language and rhetoric is just legally flawed. That it's not illegal to come here on a boat if you're fleeing persecution and you want to claim asylum. That is legal. It's just not the traditional form of entry, right? You're not committing some sort of criminal offense. I see a lot of people say, oh yeah, but if I turned up in a country without passport, mate, I'd expect to get detained as well. And it's like, well, that's because there's not a legal exception for you because you're not fleeing persecution, right? That's the first thing, and that rhetoric is deliberately divisive. And this wasn't the first thing that she'd announced. I mean, there was a point where we woke up and she announced that she instructed the Navy to push boats back around in the Channel to push families back towards Paris. And, you know, my colleagues had to litigate, not Paris, Calais, sorry. We had to litigate against that and actually represented a Home Office union because they said, well, we don't want to commit involuntary manslaughter by turning around these genuine refugees, women and children, in boats back into the Channel. Like, what's wrong with you, man? This was the first time my firm ever represented Home Office staff members through their union, right? Even they came up to us and said, this is too much. This is just too much. We're not doing this. And that, you know, that's all credit to my director because of the way that he sort of transformed the reputation of the department to the extent that they're willing to come to us now. That was all his doing. But so that same union then came to us with the Rwanda policy. And I remember she was talking about this for a while because when we were in the EU, there was a lot of talk about us taking on asylum seekers that should have claimed asylum in other European nations. But what people didn't talk about with Brexit is once we left the European Union, we lost the ability to send asylum seekers that reach our shores back to any European nation where they had been encountered. So let's say someone had been fingerprinted in Germany and then made it to the UK. All we had to do as the UK was jump onto what's known as the Eurodac database, search their fingerprints. They found out they were in Germany. Germany had to accept them. That was it. It was that easy. But they didn't advertise that with Brexit, and they lost that ability as a result of Brexit. So they then try and negotiate deals with these European countries and say, will you take them back? And obviously these European countries say, up yours, mate. You know, you made your bed, now you lie in it. So she can't do that with these European countries. one day, when Boris is on the ropes, he's about to lose his job, they realise the narrative has to change. She announces the Rwanda scheme. We read through it. It's a clandestine memorandum of understanding. It's not even like a legally binding agreement, and it's been reached with Rwanda on the basis of an initial £120 million payment to Rwanda, plus add-ons, which they refuse to disclose. Cost of living crisis, and they're giving the Rwandan government £120 million. And typically, a lot of people thought that this sort of agreement would be offshore processing, whereby if your asylum claim is granted, you do get refugee status in the UK. But it then transpired that you just never get to come to the UK. Even if you get asylum, you have to stay in Rwanda. And the reason we were all shocked by it, and the reason we had to litigate, is Rwanda's human rights record is pretty bad, man. Like the last people that sort of protested as to the amount of food that they were getting and went on hunger strike, they got mowed down in broad daylight, man. By the authorities, the manner in which members of the LGBTQ community in Rwanda are treated is questionable, to say the least. In my opinion, it would be a breach of Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights. But I don't need to bore you with the legal side of it. And they also just don't have the infrastructure to cope with lawfully processing asylum claims. So what we were arguing as a result of that litigation, again representing that same Home Office union, along with individuals who are due to be removed, was all of these arguments as to not just international law, but also the Rwandan system isn't fit for purpose. The UK High Court says no when we try and ground the first plane, which is due to take off on the 14th of July. I'm getting my months mixed up. I think it's the 14th of. 14th of June.
It was in summer, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Court of Appeal in the UK says no. The UK Supreme Court says no. So we think, right, okay, this plane's going. But we appeal to the European Court of Human Rights, which is the ultimate arbiter of the European Convention on Human Rights. So even though we've left the European Union, they still have their say.
We still live by the European law.
To that extent. And they said, it isn't even controversial, because they didn't say that the whole Rwanda scheme is unlawful. They said, well, there's a substantive examination of the Rwanda scheme going on at court. You needn't send someone to a possible human rights breach if you can simply wait until the lawfulness of that is determined. It's a pretty sensible approach. If you're playing with, if it's arguable that you're playing with someone's life, just wait and see. And if the court determines after a substantive trial that it's lawful, then press ahead. So that injunction is granted on the day of the flight. And I remember the plane was sort of on Sky News, ready to take off.
It was sitting there waiting, and they're like, is it going to go? Is it not going to go? Like, what's going on?
We were all thinking the same.
This is heartbreaking.
We were all thinking the same, because our last few clients, were getting taken to this RAF airbase, getting re-traumatized before they get sent to Rwanda. But fortunately, the injunctions came through. It wasn't just our firm. There were a number of other firms who had individual clients on the plane who could then rely upon the injunction that we got and get their clients off, and that plane didn't go. But the way it was spun after that was horrible. Again, it was used as a political tool. Suggesting that, look at how Europe's telling us how to live our lives, when in actual fact it's just the basic level of human decency.
Yeah, I mean that's quite steep, man. Because imagine you've done all that great work, and then at the end you feel vindicated, but then in the flip side of it, you're getting all this hatred come to you, and then they try and turn, the media are trying to turn the public against lawyers for doing a good job that they should directly be doing, because you would hope that if the circumstances were flipped and you had to go through something like that, the same sort of, not luxuries, but the same sort of love and attention would be given to you as well, or just basic rights. But no, it doesn't seem like that at all. And it was jarring to sit and see how passionate Tory MPs were about it and how they were all on board and really happy with it. And it just seemed just abhorrent, man, because obviously me and you and people like us have had our parents come here, and they were sponsored immigrants to get here. Fair enough, they weren't fleeing war zones, etc. So I've always got open hearts, people that tend to come over and need to have those sort of needs met to be able to flee that way of life and come to a new way of life. Fair enough, England isn't as lucrative as it was, 40, 50 years ago, but it's still a place that's more stable than somewhere else where someone's coming from. And we saw it with Ukraine as well, when people over here were like, we want to take in we want to take in a refugee into our house, and they applied to do it, but there was this big disconnect where they couldn't connect people into the country because they didn't have the systems in place, and they were really dragging their feet, hoping other countries would hoover them up.
Even that, what is the difference between Ukrainian refugees and the Iraqi, Iranian, Afghan, Somali refugees that we were seeing sent to Rwanda? I can tell you what the difference.
The colour of their skin, man. That's
how many people do you say saying that they want to take them into their homes, right? So that is one problem.
Yeah.
But there's also what you say about them trying to turn people onto lawyers. I mean, I'm sort of tied in terms of how much I can talk about it because this guy's subject to criminal trial. But September of 2020, the Daily Mail wrote an article about some of the work that our department and my director was doing, and the comments on that got quite visceral. And not too long after that, a guy turned up to our office when it wasn't heavily populated because of the lockdown. There were only a few of us in there, but he turned up with a massive machete and ultimately came for my director. And I'd love to go into the ins and outs of how he was, disarmed and what he was saying and stuff, but obviously I literally can't talk about it because a lot of it's going to come up as criminal evidence, but that's how bad it gets. And that is a direct result of deliberately divisive, false rhetoric coming out of the mouths of our politicians. And you look at someone like Suella Braverman, for example, she was the Attorney General. She has no problem in saying that she's a barrister, but she really, at the Tory party conference, she said, don't get me started on lawyers. Again, deliberately divisive, making it seem like we're the ones getting in the way of the government doing what they want, when in actual fact, no. It's us simply stating the law and the law doing its job. Right? That's the reality of it.
Man. Doesn't it get tiring doing stuff like this, like all the time? Obviously, you get that win at the end and you do the right thing, but to be dealing with this level of scrutiny and pushback and going against big guns and just feeling like everything's against you all the time, doesn't that just get exhausting for you?
Yeah, and you don't always get the win. I mean, it's difficult having to call a client and say, I did absolutely everything I could, but sadly, this is the last time I'm going to speak to you because you're now going to get sent to your country of origin and have to, go dark because you fear persecution. Sometimes you hear from them via WhatsApp. Sometimes they manage to make it back to the UK, but sometimes you don't hear from them and you wonder what happened to them. That's the difficult bit. But that, I wouldn't say it's negated by, but you do also have those moments where you tell someone that they're safe and they don't have to go back to their persecutor, or they don't have to go back to their trafficker. And those clients, I mean, I still speak to them now. They then say, I've got a wife, I've got my kids. Please come to my wedding, come to my citizenship ceremony, and we become friends. And it's the level of gratitude you get from that. I mean, look, no Christmas bonus from Barclays Capital is going to equate to the love that I get from these clients, man. Like I wouldn't trade it for the world, But I mean, going to the heart of your question, is very difficult to the extent that for about 6 months I left this line of work, and I came back pretty swiftly because the other line that I tried, even though it was still rewarding, I went into education law for a little while, but I didn't feel like I was helping the most disenfranchised people that I could serve. And as an immigration and asylum lawyer that knows how to win cases, you feel weaponized almost, and you feel as though someone's blunted your sword when you're not doing it. It's that's probably the best way I could explain it, actually, which is why a lot of people leave. The turnover in this industry is massive. Vicarious trauma is a real thing, particularly because there are some people who are miserable in their job for one reason or another. But as I said, a lot of them are like, well, okay, fine, but I'm doing it because I'm making silly amounts of money. My wife's happy, my children are happy, we're all comfortable. I'll bite the bullet, I'll retire at 50. But you can't do that in this line because you're not making that kind of money. So there are many times when it does sort of feel thankless, and that's where you just have to constantly remember that you're in a privileged position to represent these individuals. They entrust you with their lives, and you're also in a privileged position to have a job that aligns with your moral compass, that doesn't make you question who you are. And once you come to terms with the fact that even though you have to make difficult phone calls sometimes, your net benefit to the people that you want to serve, even though you don't win all of your cases, is still a positive net benefit. That's something I had to realize the hard way. That's when you find you really, really do fall in love with the job again.
Yeah, you must have felt like levels of exhaustion and just felt like things were difficult. But then when you get, obviously, as you said, the net benefit, you take a step back, which I understand is really hard to do when you can see someone's life just being taken away from them. when you look back at the work you've done and you can see like, well, actually I've done all this and it's been very, very, very beneficial to those people, and you've kept them close to your heart and you've made friends out of it and you've kept those friendships going. That's big. And that makes the world of difference to anyone, man. Like, God bless anyone that has you guys in their corner, honestly. It makes a massive difference. Respect to you, man.
No, not at all, man. I appreciate it, but honestly, I mean it when I say. I'm not just saying it because I have to say stuff like this, but it is actually one of the biggest honors and privileges to be able to represent these people, man, because they're trusting me with everything, you know. And for them to even have that faith in me, it means the world, and it motivates me to not want to let them down, which is why I will go the extra mile. I wouldn't necessarily go to the length that I go to for these clients if I compared my situation to, you know, if I was working on, I don't know, like the construction of Westfield, for example, you know, I wouldn't really care as much. But those guys are doing similar hours to me, if not longer. But what were they really doing it for?
Money, innit? But I get it.
Yeah. And I wouldn't judge anyone that's doing it for money either, to be honest, because as I said, I'm not saying that I came from a wealthy family, but I came from a family that we weren't in council housing, we didn't rent. You know, my parents lived with my grandparents for a while until they could save up, and then they had their own home with a mortgage, albeit, you know, it was a flat behind Hounslow West Tube Station, but I didn't have to worry about someone taking our house away. And even though we weren't eating out all the time, and it was a birthday treat to go to like get a KFC, we could still eat, you know. And I always had clothes, and I had a little games console. I had the Master System, I had the Mega Drive, you know. So I wasn't rich by English standards, but I was rich by the standards of the world. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, of course, man. When you're going up against people in the actual courtrooms and you see, as you said earlier, Lord, etc., how does that feel like going into that? Do you feel like it's as you said, a little bit intimidating, or do you just see it as like, no, you're just a person who knows the same shit as me, you just have more experience in this? And obviously it's not, some of it's via email exchange, but when you're face to face to a person, there's that thinking on the spot kind of thing which comes into it, which is being quick on your toes. And a lot of people, I assume, don't naturally have that gift. That must be really difficult to nurture and develop to handle those pressure situations correctly.
Yeah, really high pressure, particularly for barristers who are working on, you know, high-level Court of Appeal, Supreme Court stuff, because they're up against the cream of the crop in their profession. But the reality is, to get to that level and to even be chosen to be up against an opponent like that, you have to have a particular type of mind, and you have to be a particular kind of orator. So you would back yourself. And as with anything, a lot of it isn't necessarily to do. I mean, a lot of it. Look, I get it. You do need to think on your feet, but your preparation will have been done before that hearing, you know. And from my perspective, anyway, in the cases where I'm on my feet doing the advocacy, my opponents are Home Office civil servants, and without trying to sound too derogatory, they're not the best at what they do, and they're not really invested in what they do either, because a lot of them don't really believe in the Home Office's case. They're just doing it for their salary, their pension, they go home. So you can sort of see the gulf in class. But that's why one thing that I was always told, and it's perhaps easier because I'm a man. I was actually told this by a female law professor of mine. She said, look, you will not have trouble on your feet once you open your mouth, because people will hear the tone of your voice, people will hear the way that you speak, people will understand that you're there, and you're not the stereotypical South Asian individual with a skin fade and, you know, a beard, which is what they would assume when they see you. But sadly, look, that's the way people look at things in this line of work. That's why I'm being so frank about it. And she says, you'll be all right. And that's why I've always had that element of confidence in what I do, because I was told that, look, people might look at you a certain kind of way, but when they Google you, or when they hear you speak or whatever on your feet, you'll be just fine. Women have it a lot more difficult, because a lot of judges are men, a lot of opponents are men. And I say this with the utmost sincerity. I have seen very, very high-level judges speak to very, very high-level female barristers as if they're scolding their daughter. It's some of the most horrible shit to watch, and you feel uncomfortable watching it, but it still happens. It still happens, you know. And I've spoken to high-level female barristers that say, I get less briefs than my male counterparts because I'm a woman. You know, that stuff still happens.
What do you mean by briefs?
Instructions from clients. There'll be people that will say, well, I want a barrister, but I don't want a woman, because I think that I have more chance of winning if I have a man. Now, sadly, in front of the wrong judge, maybe you do have more chance of winning if you have a man. That's the shit reality that female barristers are met with in this line. And there's work that has been done but there is so much more to be done for them not to feel a particular type of way when they're in a courtroom. So that level of sort of intimidation or discomfort or whatever, it's there in a number of different ways. Mine is because I'm an ethnic minority man with a certain appearance. Black people have a completely different experience. I can refer you to at least 3 of my black barristers who have been mistaken for defendants in courtrooms as opposed to barristers, and that still happens.
Fucking
that still happens in 2022. It's a regular occurrence. I can send you their Twitter profiles after this if it's something that isn't believed. And women have a completely different reception when they deliver their case. That's the sad reality.
I assume that they're probably hypersexualized as well, and people try and see them as like, oh, well, you're just a woman, etc. Or they're like, oh, well, you dress a certain way, and that's how it is. Therefore, I feel like I have superiority over you, and I can talk down to you. Hence why you said the scolding of the daughter and an older lawyer. They're probably looking down like, in my day, this didn't happen. So they're just taking out the them or pain they probably feel towards it on that person, and they're just the target and the person who's on the receiving end of it.
Yeah, but the instances that I witnessed it, the judge in question or the judges in question were trying to force an argument upon these female barristers, and these female barristers were very politely but forcefully pushing back to advocate for their clients. That's what those judges didn't like. It was almost as if, hold on, I'm a judge, I'm a man. Why are you not just taking what I say as a given? And this female barrister or these female barristers are just doing their job, protecting their client's interests, right? Now, if it's a man who's doing that, you notice that the judges receive it a bit differently, and it becomes a sort of, excuse the phrase, but it becomes like an intellectual dick swinging contest, and everyone enjoys it. But that's not what it's like more often than not when a female barrister does it.
Let me guess, if they start pushing the boundaries a little bit and they start getting a little bit more aggressive back, they're deemed to be bossy, overbearing, rude, all of the above?
Yeah, that, and also, I mean, if you are deemed to be disrespectful by a judge, even if you're not disrespectful, they can hold you in contempt, which has real consequences for not just your client but you personally. If you're in contempt of court, that can be career ending. So it's a fine balance to strike, and it's not something that I ever have to think about or would have to think about, but that's just another weight on the shoulder of the female lawyer.
When you get held in contempt, what does that mean? What's the outcome of that?
Depends on the seriousness of it, but it can be jail time. It can be jail time if you're held in contempt of court. Yeah, depending on the severity of the breach. Sometimes it's a fine, sometimes it's a ban from the profession. There are a number of consequences, but you can go to prison for it.
Shit, I never thought I'd ever hear or see. With yourself, people must think that you look a little bit like Drake because of the skin fade and the
I've grown my hair out a bit. Now I get Riyad Mahrez a fair bit, bro. It used to be Drake. now I get Mahrez.
Mahrez, mate. I don't know if that's a step up or step down. I'll let you happily accept whichever one you want. I'd take Drake. I'm not gonna lie.
I'll take either of them, man. As long as it's not what I used to get at school when I used to get called Borat, I'm happy. Don't worry.
Oh man, but you didn't have the hair for it. You didn't have the curly hair.
I did. I brushed these back. If it grows out, after we're done, I'll WhatsApp you my lockdown hair, and you'll see.
All right, deal. When you couldn't see your barber, man, my beard was so long it was ridiculous. You must have the same issues.
Yeah. But obviously, I had the benefit of being able to clean shave when I wanted to, right? So it wasn't. I just couldn't trim it. But the hair just went like this. It was quite literally Sacha Baron Cohen levels. It was so bad.
Poor guy, man. You can't catch a break with the comparisons. I feel it.
It is what it is, man. It is what it is. You take the rough with the smooth.
It is what it is. So today is a historic day. For those that don't know, it is Diwali. So it's a day that Rishi Sunak has been announced as the new PM. And this is obviously going to impact you in your line of work because he might keep Grant Shapps as the new Home Secretary. How does that impact things for you? Is everything on hold at the moment with the way the policy is and all the things that are still being pushed against, or is everything moving again?
Business as usual. I mean, in situations where you're in between Home Secretaries or you have a new Home Secretary, don't forget there are hundreds, if not thousands, of civil servants working behind the scenes, right? So until their instructions are we're no longer pursuing the Rwanda policy, for example, they will continue to do so. So they haven't just suddenly conceded the case. We're still awaiting judgment in that. But Rishi has publicly come out, as many Conservatives, if not all of the candidates, I think, have said, look, we're going to make this Rwanda plan work. And why wouldn't they, mate? They've given Rwanda a non-refundable 120 mil minimum. Of course they're going to push for it because they look so weak if they don't. But it's just all about political posturing, isn't it? It's not necessarily about what's best for the country or what's best for people. And I fear that they're really going to go hell for leather to try and make this work.
Well, yeah, I mean, I sent you that clip earlier because obviously when he was announced as the winner, LBC started to retweet all of these little clips of him and Nick Ferrari. And Nick said to him, are you going to make it work? And he said, yeah, I'll make it work. And he said, well, shake my hand. You'll have at least one person on that plane in the next 6 months. He said, I'm not going to commit to that. So he knows that he'll do his best to make it work, but he's going to come up against a hell of a fight to get it done. But I would have thought someone who is ethnic minority background would have been against it, but then Priti Patel led it up. So I guess you got to align with your party values, don't you?
Yeah, black and brown places in high places is a myth, man. I've always said that. There's a difference between sort of optical diversity and actual representation. They're two different things. A lot of people embrace diversity as if it's the be all and end all, but just because a room looks diverse doesn't mean that it represents the people that it purports to represent, right? And the most infuriating thing about listening to Priti Patel and Suella Braverman, and a lot of they spoke about their immigrant heritage, and they almost used it as a way of being totally bulletproof when it came to any criticism, right? So Suella was like, look, my father came from Kenya or whatever, and Priti Patel said similar sorts of things, but and they almost enjoyed the fact that it annoyed certain sections of ethnic minorities that they were doing that to then advocate for the exact opposite. But that's why I try and sort of, as much as I can, and I'm not saying I can do this completely, but as much as I can, I try and detach myself from the way the person looks, because there are people who look nothing like me that have policies that I love, you know, for whatever went wrong towards the end of Jeremy Corbyn's career. There was a lot that he said, particularly with regard to sort of social welfare, economic policy, foreign policy, that I was in total agreement with. I felt like he represented my interests better than most people have over the last 2 or 3 decades. And he looks nothing like me. We're not from the same background, you know. So it's not just about someone coming from a similar place as you in that sense. It's about them understanding the amount of people that they have to represent, and not just honing in on that 1% to keep them happy. But sadly, the Conservative Party will continue to do that.
Well, yeah, I mean, they fucked the economy up pretty badly in 45 days, so let's see what the next guy can do, man. I mean, I was talking to a mate of mine at work today, and he said, maybe it's time for a black PM. I said, mate, you had your moment in the spotlight. Kwasi has fucked you guys for years. You're finished. Like, there's no coming back from this, man. It's done. He's like, well, it worked for Obama. I said, America wasn't ready for Obama, but I don't think you guys are going to be ready for him in a while. And my concern is, if Rishi shits the bed, it's going to set Indians back many, many decades, because we're all going to be tarnished with that same brush, regardless of what comes of it. And he's got a tough thing to sort out with the cost of living, bills, energy, recession, housing bubble. He's got a lot of shit to sort, and I don't think he can get everything right. Something's going to go wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I'd begin by saying I still don't think he will be as bad or perceived to be as bad in terms of human values as Boris and perhaps Liz Truss were. Liz Truss also competence concerns, but it can't really get much worse. It can't really get much worse than them. So I think in that sense, he might be okay. But no, I know what you mean. There is definitely a burden if you're the first of any sort of minority to do anything. I do understand that, but part of me thinks it goes back to what I was saying. Look, this might be controversial, but I wouldn't care if the next 10 prime ministers were old white men if they adequately represented everyone in terms of their policies. I don't need you to look like me. I don't need you to come from my ends. I need you to look out for the people that really need the help, and then I'll back you. You know. So yeah, it's a double-edged sword, that one.
It is, and I think today has been probably the worst day to announce a brown PM, because you've got heavy fireworks outside, you've got Diwali happening, you've got this all over TV. Bro, I was just watching Channel 4 with my wife, right, for like 10 minutes. They showed like highlights of Z News on there with like full Hindi writing, all celebrations. They're in the Modi has sent his congratulations. And I'm like, can you lot stop? Because I feel like the EDL are going to come knocking on my door tomorrow, man. Like, yo, chill with this. You guys are taking it too much, right? And Middle England, they probably ain't going to like this. They're going to be massively pissed.
Yeah, but if they voted for the Conservative Party, then they voted for the Conservative Party, right? I mean, then they're going to have to sit there and live with it. Their reality is Sadiq Khan is the mayor of London and Rishi Sunak is the Prime Minister of England. Get over it.
They're not going to go over it, though, are they, man?
Look, again, it depends, man. It depends. This is
I
what
don't know.
I'm saying.
I think that
This is exactly what I'm saying. If these policies end up suiting them, then the classic Chelsea fan with Didier Drogba, it's he's one of us. He's all right. You know, and they will they might it's the truth. It's the truth. That's what it that's what it was.
Yeah.
That's what it was. And they might feel the same way about Rishi. And that's why I think Priti Patel and Suella Braverman really played up that rhetoric to sort of feel as though they perhaps had a sense of belonging amongst that group of far right grassroots conservative voters. I don't think Rishi will necessarily do the same because he realises he has to unite the party, but I don't know. I just think that so many people in this country have now lost faith in this government. They're not really fussed who's running it. As long as their interest rates on their mortgage are affordable, they'll be like, okay, fine, this is better than it was last month.
True, but I do think that if it was someone like Penny Mordaunt, she would have been more palatable to the rest of the party because she is white. She fits the bill, per se, even though she may not be as fiscally responsible or proven at top level. And I'm thinking if this does cause a further split in the Tory party anyway, that only works out better for the next election for a different government to come in. So, I mean, I've made it clear that I heavily favour Labour over the Conservatives because I just think they've ruined the country over the last 10 years, man. And things are just at an all-time low in so many sectors. So I'm hoping that it's a 3D chess move and things work out. But people just find Keir Starmer so non-palatable and they think he's boring or he's lame or he's not charismatic enough. And I'm like, what does the guy have to do to prove himself to make sure that he's, you know, he fits the bill? I get he's always going to be a politician. He's not going to give you a straight answer. And sometimes he's going to say things that will not give you an answer on a problem that you're pitching to him. However, they all have to do it. You've got to draw your lines somewhere, haven't you?
Definitely. But also now, Rishi isn't exactly the most wonderfully charismatic orator either. So I don't think there's going to be too much to pick between him and Keir Starmer. Like looking at his 1.5 minute speech today, it literally looked like a battery powered robot when he was delivering that. Right, there was absolutely nothing.
That was horrible,
it was
man.
Terrible watch.
Oh god,
terrible watch. So I think him and Keir are probably on. I think Keir's probably a better orator, given that he was a barrister anyway. So he might actually have the one up on him finally, because that's one thing that Boris Johnson had. For all of his flaws, he was a good orator. He was a good public speaker. People like listening to him, and that's what got him to where he was.
Yeah, true. Imagine if he didn't have all those scandals, he would have actually been an alright PM, I guess, in the grand scheme of things. Yeah. People would have still kept him in.
Yeah, I could have said that about a lot of politicians.
Which is a scary thought in itself, isn't it?
I could have said that about a lot of politicians over the years. Imagine if they didn't have those scandals.
One way or another, it's going to get you, man. Let's jump into lighter things, bro. So, AFTV. Genuinely, how in the world have you got the job that 99% of all football fans envy and want to have in their spare time? So you're living the dream in your current day-to-day life by being a legal aid worker, and now you're also living the dream in your spare time by being on AFTV. So tell me how that came about, man.
It's still weird for me. I was a big fan of the channel. My younger brother got me into it because obviously my generation were perhaps a bit slower to get onto the whole YouTube thing. My brother's 7 years younger than me.
Yeah.
He always used to watch it. These are back in the days of when Troops was sort of new to the channel and AFTV was just starting up. And I was always a bit like...
Oh, in its early days.
Yeah. And my brother still references people from this channel that I haven't heard of, like from back in the day.
Mm.
And I'm just sitting there thinking, wow, this is a thing. People just watch people talk about the match that they just watched. And then throughout COVID, I found myself doing it a lot. And I started watching the watch-alongs, and I was like, this is actually amazing. Like, eventually they started to feel like my friends, even though I didn't know them, even though that sounds quite sad. But you couldn't meet many people during lockdown. So I didn't mind watching them watch football and stuff. It made it seem like I was watching the game with my mates. So I started watching the channel a lot.
Yeah.
And then last December, when everyone got COVID, I got COVID. And I was just bored, sat in my room, and the guy from AFTV called James was hosting a Twitter space. And I joined, and I was one of the lucky few to get unmuted. And we spoke about what the board would need to do in the January transfer window to make top four feasible, something along those lines. And he then...
Oh, this is with Aubameyang as well,
Exactly.
and he'd been banished out the squad.
Exactly, around then, and we didn't know why, we didn't know whether we were getting a replacement or whatever. And
Yeah.
he then follows me back, and he messages me straight away, and I'm thinking, like, did I say something wrong? And I open up the message, obviously delirious on, like, codidromol or whatever I was having. And,
Yeah.
and he was like, look, we want to get you into the studio. That was great. I love getting your thoughts on Arsenal. And I just thought he was blowing smoke up my arse. He's followed everyone back from the space, and he's saying the same thing, whatever. But lo and behold, like a few weeks later, one of the guys that I watch a lot on the channel, a guy called Turkish, follows me. And I'm thinking, why has he just followed me?
Yeah.
And I then get a DM saying, look, we're filming a show called The Supporters Club, which I religiously watched. Like, I'm a big fan of that show. And they said, do you want to come in? And I'm sitting there thinking, what? Like, it's in 2 days. What's it about? Like, where do you film? Is it one take? I've never done this before. Do I know enough? So I tell my boss, I go, look, man, they've got 1.5 million subs. And I know that my profession is quite serious. Like, is this cool? He sanctions it. He's a massive Liverpool fan. My CEO is a massive Watford fan. They're cool. They're like, yeah, go for it, man. Have fun.
Nice.
Have fun. And I go on there. And look, Turkish and James are there. When I mean, I get sent like a one-sentence topic, and they say whatever you want. There's no briefing. There's no agenda. There's no filtration. When they say this is an organic fan channel, I mean it is an organic fan channel. They quite literally, and it was an unedited show that was put out, one take, one hit, and they quite literally just gave me free reign. And that's why when a lot of people say, oh, fan channels are promoting their own agendas, or this guy's acting or whatever, bro, I can tell you now, having been on the channel as a total civilian, that is not the case. It is just a platform for fans to voice their opinions. And the more the comments came in, the comments were positive, the more I got called back. And now, you know, they get my availability at the beginning of the month, and they basically said, look, we'll have you on whenever you can, because they know that I've got a job and they're really flexible with it. They work around me. So I try and fit it in as much as I can. And to be honest, bro, they're all so lovely. Like, there's not a single person that I've met as part of that AFTV crew that I haven't thought I would love to be friends independently with you outside of this as well. Like, they're all just so great, full of laughs, great personalities, and they know their stuff. They really know their stuff, and they love the club. It's a great channel to be a part of, and as you say, man, it's a real dream, right? To sort of be able to do that outside of your day job. And now it's weird because, you know, on the weekend I was at karaoke in town with my girlfriend, and someone pulled up in the middle of the road and just rolled down the window, and they're like, "Yo, AFTV Sheroy, we love what you say, man." Yeah. My girlfriend was like, "Is this going to happen a lot?" And I was like, "I have no idea, but it happens every so often." Like one bus driver let me on for free, and he was like, "Come on, get in." You know, it's weird. You get recognised in places you didn't think you get recognised.
That's mad. That just shows the reach of like the fan channels, man. Even if they're not subscribed, they're still watching. Like, I watch it all the time, man. AFTV's like, it's good entertainment. Even when you guys go into meltdown, even if you guys win, I still watch it because I'm like, you know what, I want to see what the real reaction is. And there's certain people whose opinions you agree with, and some who you think are legitimate, and some who you think that are making it up, etc. Everyone's got their own views. But who was the person you met and you thought, oh my god, it's him? Like, you were starstruck by?
Starstruck is a strong word, but it was definitely surreal seeing Turkish, because I watch him a lot. He was one of my favourite on the platform, and my first show was with him. And then all of the comments were quite funny because we're like sort of Middle Eastern looking dudes, right? So all of the
you both look alike.
All the comments were like, "What is it? You just brought your little cousin onto the show, yeah?" But generally it was seeing Robbie was mad as well, because obviously, look, you see people on the screen all the time, but they look different in person, right? And he's done so much, man. Like, one, he's a really benevolent guy. He does a lot of really kind-natured stuff outside of AFTV that he just doesn't talk about. You know, you get those people that sort of do charity, but then take a picture of themselves doing it and put it all over LinkedIn and Twitter and stuff. He's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
He's the exact opposite. Like, he will do it not for the clout. And other people will tell me that he's done this wonderful stuff and he stayed quiet about it. And he helps so many other fan channels and independents. Like, he's not one of those guys that is like, I've made it to the top of the ladder, I'm going to pull that blood clot ladder up behind me. He's not doing that. He's quite literally like, look, he's like, there is enough for all of us to eat here. And he helps out so many people. So many people. You could speak to people at United View. You could speak to, you know, the Parisian Londoner. You could speak to a number of YouTube channels, and they would say, Robbie, Expressions, for example, they would say, this guy hasn't necessarily created us, but he's definitely gone somewhere towards contributing to our success. And that That takes a particular kind of person.
You would never think that something like this would ever be a thing. Like, say, what, AFTV was launched in, 2011? 2012? Maybe prior to that?
10 years, I think. 10 years.
Yeah, 10 years. All right, so say in 2010, if I told you in 10 years' time you'd be on AFTV doing this, you'd be like, what the fuck's an AFTV? Why am I not on Sky Sports if I wanted to go somewhere? And now you can see that fan channels are starting to slowly surpass Sky Sports. Like me, I will mute the TV and I'll listen to a watch along from the United View. I like listen to rants because he makes his own content on his own channel. And I'll listen to those guys speak about my team because they understand your team or my team to a better level than a commentator would. And they're aware of all these little like small build-ups, these small issues, these little bits of play that they've seen game to game that start to accumulate and piss off fans that a lot of commentators who dip in and out of games wouldn't understand. So I think that that's where the future is. But I do worry that fan channels are hitting their ceiling and they're starting to be matched point for point with Sky Sports and the overlap, because the overlap have that exclusivity agreement to go and be direct with a club and they can get in compared to what fan channels can do. They may not have that leverage because, as you said, fan channels are unfiltered. They say exactly what they want, and sometimes that might upset people at the club, and they might say, well, I don't want that person on, I don't agree with them, even though what they're saying can be factually correct. Whereas Sky Sports will have pundits that do that, but the brand of Sky Sports protects them.
I completely agree, but one, the Sky Sports rights are really only UK. These YouTubers reach global audiences, which is massive, and just in terms of the reach, right? So they've got a wider net, but the net that Sky Sports has is a lot more dense in the UK. But also, man, look, how do I put this? So there's a guy called Cecil on AFTV. One of the kindest guys you'll meet. Ex-footballer, does a lot of work now for footballers that have their contracts terminated when they're 16 to try and get them into another profession. He has managed to build bridges with Arsenal Football Club to such an extent that there are certain individuals who are coming onto the channel that wouldn't have necessarily come on before. So Robbie was allowed to interview David Dein last month. You know, one of the biggest personalities in Arsenal Football Club ever. A few weeks ago, he had Alex Scott in for an exclusive interview, which is also on YouTube. Right? These are people that you would never have been on a fan channel a few years ago, but they're bridging that gap. You know, and when the European pre-season tour, part of it was in Europe. I think we had Nuremberg, and then we went to Orlando. AFTV were allowed backstage to the presser and had media access and asked Mikel Arteta questions directly. So these are incremental steps in the right direction where they are getting that club access. If you asked Robbie 10 years ago that he'd have David Dein, Alex Scott and be in a presser, he would have laughed. So who's to say that in 10 years' time they won't have relatively unfiltered access to the club? Who knows, right? Who knows? And it also coincides with what I would say has been a real shift in stance with certain fan channels anyway. I think it's definitely happened with AFTV. I think it's definitely the case with United View, even though United View was never like this, where they're trying to really get intellectually stimulating content out as opposed to that pure let's let rival fans tune in when we lose style of entertainment. Because even though there are massive personalities on these channels now, the caliber of show, the element of discourse, the length of the content, the amount of thought that goes into it is completely different to what it was a few years ago. They've kind of moved with the times as well, which is why, as you rightly said, Sky Sports and all of these other people have had to really sort of step up and try and meet it in the middle because they've realised what's happening here. Look, the next 5 to 10 years could be really interesting, man, really interesting. And they're being interactive. Like you can send super chats in on YouTube. There's a full-time show on AFTV where you can literally send in your clips and just get them played out, and then we'll respond to them. And they bring in complete next man like me to be a part of their channel if you know, it's as interactive as you can get.
You can be the next Sheroy, man.
I didn't say it.
I said it, man. I said it. It's good to know about the fan channels not having an agenda and they just simply do things how they see fit. That warms my heart because I always want people to be themselves and to just say what they feel. Even if it's wrong and it doesn't make sense and they have this strong opinion, it's good to talk it out and then obviously get a different opinion and then level it if you can with somebody else who is a fan and who is on your side, who isn't going to be winding you up on like a troll job or anything like that.
That's the main thing, isn't it? The idea that it could be a right or wrong view is one thing, but every football fan is entitled to their opinion, and it's not up to anyone. There's no sort of ultimate arbiter of football opinions. You can have an opinion. All right, let me choose a United player that divides opinion. Sancho. There are a lot of players that will say Sancho has been doing a great job for the team. United fans. There are a lot of people that will say Sancho hasn't quite hit the heights that he ought to have hit. Those are opinions. Neither are conclusively right or wrong. But you get genuine football fans, match-going fans that go to every game and watch Sancho play for the exact same amount of time that have those differing opinions. And my point has always been, not just in football fan channels, but any walk of life, even if you disagree with someone, there's a way of delivering that message without being condescending or rude. And if you can strike that balance, then you get really interesting content, really thought-provoking content, and you cater, most importantly, to the entire fan base. Because there's no point in having a bunch of people that agree, because that's also not reflective of your fan base. There's no point in only having Asian fans on, because that's not just reflective of your fan base. There's no point in only having white men on, because that's not reflective of your fan base. And that's what these fan channels are getting really good at doing now, because if you can look at a sofa on AFTV now, you can see Robbie is a black guy, Charlene is a mixed race woman, Cecil is a mixed race man, Turkish is a half Turkish and half Irish guy. You've got me, you've got James as a white guy, Lee Judge as a white guy. You've got a complete mix of people. And it's just wonderful to see, man. And the reality is they're all just absolute dons, and we get along so well. And it's very much the same at United View. I watch you guys as well. You got Flex, but you got Owen. You got a bunch of people from differing backgrounds with very different styles that know the game.
Good. The only question I've got for you now is what's your thoughts on football Twitter? Because that is the most mixed bag place you can ever live. Some days it makes you laugh. Some days you're like, what even is this, man? Like, people on there criticizing legends from like 10 years ago, saying, unpopular opinion, XXX is not as good as XXX today. And I'm just like, stop it. Like, genuinely stop it. And they're doing it to wind up other people, and then gets interactions, and it's just the algorithm thing, isn't it?
That's exactly why. And I think, to be honest, our two clubs are probably the worst culprits for it, because there are a lot of Arsenal accounts and a lot of United accounts that put shit out deliberately to wind people up, right? The one that comes to mind with you guys anyway, I don't know if you follow him. It's an account called United Trey. Now, some of the
I don't follow him. I hate him.
Yeah. So, but he's on my feed all the time, right? Because people interact with his stuff. Now, some of the stuff he comes out with, it's designed to push buttons, but it works. It works. It does. He gets so many likes and retweets and interactions or whatever. It's serving its purpose. But I think football Twitter is one of the most toxic things ever. It's the best place for hot takes on absolute nonsense. It's the best place to look at an entire VAR move, but look at it with one screenshot that's damning, when in actual fact that's not what the move looked like. And quite frankly, it's the worst place for abuse, and that's what really pisses me off. The idea that you have these nameless people behind a keyboard in their grandma's box room, sitting there just abusing you as if they have some sort of divine right to tell you what sort of person you are. And I'm not just talking about footballers. This happens to us as well, right? Because we're putting ourselves out there. And I understand that when you put yourself out there, you're almost accepting that you're going to be susceptible to this stuff. So I'm not saying that I was taken aback by it, but it's bad. It's bad. And the stuff that the players get, absolutely abhorrent stuff, Like, look at the stuff that Ivan Toney had to deal with last week, man. I mean, how can...
Ivan Toney's been given, man.
Yeah, and he's not the only one, but he's just the most recent example I can think of, right? It's horrible. It's horrible. And it can lead to things culminating into things like the Granit Xhaka affair at Palace, where he just threw his shirt on the floor after he got a few boos, because he had seen all of the horrid stuff that he was getting in his messages, hope your wife dies, hope your daughter gets it, or whatever it was. And that stays in your mind as a human. And he gets that online. He gets that on Twitter. He gets that on Instagram. So he's managed to sort of, as he got older, put that behind him. And it takes a very, very strong character to be able to do that and rekindle a relationship with fans the way he has. But look, not everyone can do that, man. And it can send people, honestly, spiraling into questioning their self-worth and real depression.
And you can see it happening to some footballers. Like, I do think that some of them do read some of the things online, because a few of them have alluded to it. Like Bruno Fernandes, he's alluded to reading stuff online saying like, well, people say this, but then I do this in return, and no one takes note of the fact that I do this. And I'm like, big man, you're on a lot of money. Get off Twitter. Just focus on yourself, man. Like, do not be doing that. Listen to your coaches and just do that. And even the greatest basketball players in the world, like, I'm not sure if you're into basketball, but the Golden State Warriors, Steve Kerr is their coach, and he sits in the locker room with Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green at halftime, and they're on their phones. And he has to say to them nicely, is that going to help you being on your phone? Because you think football Twitter is bad, mate. Basketball Twitter is the worst by far, because NBA fans do not give a flying fuck about any player. They will drill any player into the ground. If Steph Curry hits an air ball, it's done. He's getting grilled for like a few hours. If LeBron James hits an air ball or misses a last minute shot, he's getting grilled. Everyone's questioning his legacy. And I'm like, whoa, people need to chill the fuck out. But they really take it further and further, and it gets in players' minds. Like if Steph Curry, an MVP and 5-time winning champion, I think it is looking at stuff like this, I'm like, why are you doing that, bro? You don't need to do that. But it's a part of the culture now.
Yeah, I mean, if I was managing a team like that, I'd definitely have a ban on phones, at least during the game, to be honest. But that's probably not my prerogative. I think what a lot of people forget, man, is, look, I'm going to be 33 in March, okay? And seeing that sort of stuff now would probably have some sort of effect on me. I'd have the infrastructure to deal with it, but that's because I'm a lot more comfortable in who I am as a man. Bukayo Saka, for example, when he was getting all of that racist abuse after the Euros, having taken on the pressure of the penalty and then missing it, was what, 18, 19? Imagine when I met you, you were first year uni. Imagine if that happened to that guy that I met all those years ago. What would it have done to him? Crippling.
I'd have crumbled clean.
Crippling.
100%.
You know, and we forget how young these boys are, and speak to them not just as if they're adults, but as if they're not even human. And I think I understand the argument that, look, you're living a privileged life and you're getting paid a lot of money and so forth, and I understand that. But the sacrifice they make as a result of that is less time with their family, not being able to be there for their kids, not being able to just randomly go down and have a few Guinnesses and a mixed grill. Not being able to stay awake until 3 a.m. for no reason. Not being able to eat what they want.
Yeah.
Not being able to go out in public. Those are the sacrifices. It's not being racially abused and called all sorts of names 24/7 and having your family abused on social media. That's not the sacrifice that they signed up for. You know, so that's where I don't think the argument holds weight. Yes, they do get paid a lot, but they make massive sacrifices that we don't make. You know, they don't have the element of freedom that we have as civilians, and that's the sacrifice that they're getting remunerated for.
All or Nothing, yeah. So take me through your thoughts on All or Nothing. What did you think? I thought it was great. I was a big fan of it. I think it's the best one that's been made. You go.
Yeah, I was really worried when it was announced that this was happening, because the season didn't end the way that I hoped, and we narrowly lost out in what I would call semi-embarrassing fashion in terms of the top 4 battle. And there was a side to Arteta in that documentary that I didn't know existed. He's very well media trained and very well articulated, and delivers his message very quickly, very concisely, but he doesn't necessarily always display that he has that level of aggression and passion that the most successful managers have had when he's in front of those cameras. But that All or Nothing documentary showed me a completely different side to the man, taking absolutely no prisoners, going up to them and saying, "You're fucking soft. You have to earn the right to play. That was shit." And throwing, laundry baskets around and walking out and kicking bottles. I was like, "Oh, hold on. This is the stuff that I used to be jealous of Sir Alex Ferguson doing." Not drawing any comparison between the managers.
No. But I get it though.
But that's the sort of temperament that I wish a lot of our managers have had, and he's got it. But he also has the other side of it, the technical nous, and he's earning the respect of the young players, and he's not afraid to make big decisions. And we got to learn a lot about other players, man. Like I didn't know much about the personality of Eddie Nketiah, for example, but I really liked the way he came across, speaking to Sambi Lokonga in that documentary and saying, "Listen, don't feel sorry for yourself because you're not starting. You're not the only one, yeah? We need to work to get into this team."
which is sick.
Yeah,
I thought that was really cool how he just pitched it out there, and I was like, fair play.
Yeah, it was great. It was great, and seeing how Aaron Ramsdale's devastated, not because we lost the game, but because he lost a clean sheet. Things like that I would never have known if it wasn't for that documentary. And seeing ultimately the deference that people have to Mikel Arteta within the club hierarchy. It's quite clear that they wanted to reintegrate Aubameyang, but Arteta said, "All right, but that doesn't send out the kind of message that I want to send out. So sorry, no." Next thing you know, Aubameyang's gone.
Which is similar to what United are having with Ronaldo to a kind of point, which is he's doing things off-piste that isn't in line with what Ten Hag wants. But I don't think Ten Hag's as probably nice as Arteta. I feel like he's more autocratic. Like, this is how you do it. Bam. Don't fuck around. Like, there's been clips of him, again, football Twitter, but 95th minute against Chelsea, Luke Shaw is doing kick-ups on the side to waste time, and he's pissed on the edge of his technical area, screaming at him to get the ball forward because he wants to go for the winner. And I'm like, you're obsessed. Even I would have been like, chill, take the points. In 95th minute, you're away from home. But he wants that. He wants that next level of aggression, and he won't take anyone disrespecting him. So similar to the Aubameyang thing, and weirdly, we're getting to Christmas, World Cup, whatever. We might have the same thing with Cristiano, where his contract is cancelled, and all of a sudden the team has to make do without a striker. It's literally a very similar carbon copy to what you have and what we have, and we're very unlikely to spend in January. So yeah, it's interesting to sort of sit back and think, is Erik ten Hag being like that, or is he doing what Arteta is, which is being quite nice in the changing room, but on the pitch he's very animated?
Yeah, it's difficult, but the reality is Ten Hag has managerial experience and has won stuff with Ajax, so it's less surprising. Mikel Arteta had not managed any professional football team to any sort of standard. That's why I was learning about him from scratch. It's not just learning about him as an Arsenal manager; it's learning about him as a football manager.
Yeah.
I had no clue. At least with Ten Hag, you had an idea of what his philosophy was, you had an idea of what his personality was, and that's why he was recruited. But we had no idea with Mikel Arteta. We absolutely didn't have a clue. Now, what he's doing with Ronaldo, again, I'm not privy to anything behind the scenes. I just don't see why that couldn't have been done in the summer. That's my only thing with it, right? I mean, if you can have a few training sessions with him and you understand that he's not necessarily going to fit into your philosophy, you can probably gauge that he's not the guy that's going to want to come on in the 93rd minute in most games. I don't think that will be too difficult to understand. Even though I don't know Ronaldo personally, I could have guessed that. Why not?
Anyone could have. Yeah.
Why not cut your losses then? But hindsight's a wonderful thing, and that's why he's a football manager and I'm not. But that's my only sort of inkling there, because then maybe you would have had the time and the money to bring someone else in.
Maybe, but his commercial value is priceless to the club. Think of the amount of 7 shirts that they must have sold.
So that comes from the board.
At the start of the year.
So that comes from the board.
Or even then. Of course it does. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And I'm sure Arteta's had to bite the bullet with a couple of board decisions over the years as well, man. It's not as if the manager has ultimate autonomy, no matter what they say or what they'd like to believe. If the owner of the football club says something's happening, then something's more likely than not going to happen.
I agree. I'll round it out with one final question for you. If you had to pick between your current day job and doing AFTV full time, which one would you pick and why?
Oh, that is tough. That is very difficult, because AFTV is the only time that I switch off from everything. I'm not on my phone. I don't check my emails.
Yeah.
I'm just engrossed in it's because even if I'm watching football with my friends and I'm not on camera, I'll still be on my phone sometimes. Whereas this is just immersed in it. But I would have to go with my actual full-time legal career, not because of the money, but because I've left it before, and I could only leave it for a period of I left for about 6 months, and I couldn't do without it. It's a strange addiction. I'd love serving these clients, man, and I wouldn't change it for the world. As I say, it's an absolute honour and privilege, and I feel like my net benefit to society and how that aligns with my moral compass is probably far better than what I could achieve through football YouTube anyway. And quite frankly, there are loads more football YouTubers that are far more entertaining to watch than me, so the football YouTube scene world wouldn't miss me that much anyway. But I just think that this is going to sound really like soppy, but my grandparents always used to tell me, look, the legacy that you leave on this planet isn't what you acquire, it's how people remember you, and how those who are less fortunate remember you, and that a lot of their sort of religious background anyway places great emphasis on good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. And for me, that's what my profession sort of enables. It's one facet of my profession, and it enables me to do that. So that's my answer, and I'm sticking to it. Sorry, that took way too long, but that's my thought process.
No, that's a good answer, man. I think you explained it. You didn't just give me a single answer and then go quiet. I've had guests do that, and I'm like, are you going to speak, or do you want me to jump in? Like, how am I going to do this? But thanks for coming on, man. Big respect. Tell people how they can find you online.
Yeah.
And tell them about the podcast that you run as well.
Yeah, no, thank you, man. I appreciate the opportunity to jump into that. So you can find me at at Sheroy Zaq, Sheroyzaq on Twitter, at szaq11, szaq11 on Instagram. And the podcast is called the No Walls Podcast. Now, it's not just my podcast. It's a firm-affiliated podcast, but we're not a solely legal podcast. Like, if you don't know much about the plight of asylum seekers or vicarious trauma within the profession or current affairs within the immigration and asylum sphere, we touch on all of those things, and we try and make it as digestible to people who aren't from the legal sector as possible, because we realize there's a lot of legal podcasts out there that even I can find boring, and I'm a lawyer, do you know what I mean? So God knows what other people would think of it. So we just try to focus on the human element of all of this, particularly the accounts of the plight of our clients, to make people realize that asylum seekers aren't just statistics, they're not just people on boats. People need to realize exactly what they're going through to really understand what their vote means. And that's one of the things that we're trying to achieve through that podcast. So that's called the No Walls Podcast. It can be found on Spotify, iTunes, all of that good stuff. There's a link tree to it on our Twitter page as well, so you can find it on there.
And you can find it's his podcast because there's a little animation of Sheroy, so it looks like him in the image. So pick the guy that looks like Riyad Mahrez, Drake, and Bora.
Bora. I knew you'd put that in there.
You wait until you send me that picture. I'm going to put it as one of the thumbnails on it.
No problem.
No, I'm kidding. I'd never do that to you.
It's all good. I can take
Thanks for coming on, bro.
Bro, thank you. Thank you for having me, man. It's been a pleasure. I don't know where the time has gone. It's flown.
It's been great, man. We will definitely do this again. You got to fill me in on the next steps that happen with the government policies and whatnot in the future. So we'll definitely have you back on.
No problem. You tell me when. Take care, bro.
No worries. Guys, thanks for making it this far. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, drop us a message, drop us a DM, hit up Sheroy, let him know your thoughts on why Arsenal aren't the best team in the country and why they shouldn't still be top of the table. All right, cheers. Catch you later, guys, in a bit.